Enes, let's continue with you, with a completely different title. Now we will talk about Syria, of course. There is another issue that we have been talking about for a very long time. Whether the March 10 agreement will actually be put into action, whether it will turn into action, whether the SDF will be integrated or not, but we see that the ties with the government in Damascus have really come to a breaking point. Tensions are escalating. Here in France, the Syrian government very clearly pulled the plug on the issue of whether or not it would go to the summit in Paris. So what happened today? You know that the head of the SDF is Mazlum Abdi, who is known to be close to Abdullah Öcalan. Now there is talk of changing this. Who is called the future Sipan Hemo. He is one of the commanders of the YPG. By the way, he is the one who called Turkey's deployment of troops in Syria a declaration of war. Such a commander has such a place in the ZDG, in the YPG. So we don't believe that Turkey will stand on this issue. We don't believe that it will be able to look at it from a compromising point of view. By the way, he is one of the first names to go to Russia since the war started. What do you say, Hoja? If such a change happens, that is, if Mazlum Abdi leaves and Sipan Hemo arrives, what will change? What do they expect to change so they will try to make such a move? This is a rumor, of course. It has not turned into action yet.
Yes, of course, there is a serious pressure from the Americans on the PKK-SDF in Syria. The Americans also want the agreement to be implemented because Trump, he wants to withdraw from Syria. This is not a complete theory. Trump really wants this and has withdrawn a certain number of troops. In fact, there has been another withdrawal in the past weeks. Trump obviously sees this as an unnecessary engagement. Now, of course, there are different groups within the SDF, within the PKK. There is serious resistance. In other words, in order not to implement this decision, to spread it over time, to delay it, maybe new opportunities will emerge during this time, new conditions will emerge. They are resisting until the last moment in order to find new support, and they will resist until the last moment. Because the PKK, he thinks he has a historic opportunity in Syria, so we need to see this. In the history of the PKK, for the first time, it had the opportunity to dominate a geography. In other words, a terrorist organization that was in the past in rural areas, in the mountains, has landed in the cities. It controls a population, it controls something there, it controls the population, it controls natural resources. Therefore, of course, they do not want to waste this chance for themselves. So we can say that they will do everything until the end. In other words, in order not to give up on this one way or another, in order to get a feature there. For this, of course, the support from Israel, they are actually using it. In a way, they are very hopeful of the support from Israel. Therefore, they continue to put it on the line. Now, of course, the change in the leadership team may lead to different... It could also be a reflection of groupings. Maybe a name with better relations with the Americans, the name you mentioned. With this, maybe a new process of stalling, that is,
one of the
a
moves
process
to buy
of buying time against
But does it
the
seem
Americans.
a bit difficult to understand it as an effort to keep good relations with Turkey and Syria? At least if we look at the past, what kind of a commander he was in the YPG. What do you think? Or is the past in the past and now? I am saying this because you want to think well.
I mean, the person you call Mazlum Abdi, his relations with Abdullah Öcalan, even being his son or something like that is okay. But the other names you mentioned are names that are ultimately in the cadre of the PKK's terrorist organization. So at the end of the day, there is no difference in terms of quality when he is in the PKK cadre. In other words, from Turkey's point of view, everyone in the PKK cadre, from the top to the bottom, is equally a terrorist from Turkey's point of view. Of course, the leadership cadre is one thing, so strategically eliminating them has a different impact. But at the end of the day, they are all members of a separatist terrorist organization. Therefore, I am not sure if there is a difference here for Turkey, but maybe in terms of relations with the Americans, we can also try to communicate with them. In terms of themselves, this may have been thought of as a way of sending them a message, but we see this. They want to use this chance until the end. They want to try. But it is not possible for Syria to accept such a thing, because almost 1/3 of Syria's territory is currently occupied by the PKK. These lands contain important agricultural basins. Water resources, almost all of Syria's oil, almost all of it is under PKK occupation. So this is the PKK-controlled territory in Syria. As long as the regions do not rejoin Syria, there will not be a functioning state in Syria, a functioning state. It is not possible to establish a sustainable state. Therefore, from the Damascus administration's point of view, these places are obviously not dispensable. For us, the issue is completely different. In other words, Turkey cannot allow a special administration here in any way. I'll tell my lord, it means that tomorrow, it means the independence of this region the day after tomorrow. After it becomes independent, it means that we will be faced with territorial demands against Turkey and, dare I say it, attempts to divide Turkey. Therefore, from our point of view, there is no option other than the complete liquidation of the PKK in Syria. Yes, there are Kurds living there. Their legitimate representatives should be represented in Syria in the new government, in the state, recognizing the cultural rights of the Syrian Kurds as an ethnic minority. It is essential to guarantee their cultural rights and other human rights. In fact, the Bashar al-Assad regime and his father Hafez al-Assad did not even grant citizenship to Kurds in Syria for many years. And after the Syrian revolution started, there were different Kurdish groups in Syria. Some of them were close to Badania, some of them were close to Talibani. There were different groups. But the United States of America came in, and the PKK, which is a radical terrorist group, the most problematic terrorist group for Turkey, came out of them and started working with the PKK there. And the PKK and the Assad regime also preferred it, by the way. So this was a joint decision, by the way. So Assad, the US, Iran, Russia, all used the PKK against Turkey to step on Turkey's toes. And the PKK has taken all legitimate, he purged the Kurdish opposition, executed their leaders. Gross human rights violations were committed against them. A significant number of them fled to Turkey. I mean, Kurds, you know, the so-called PKK was supposedly fighting for the Kurds. They fled to Turkey, and Turkey welcomed them. Even Salih Muslim, you know, the famous Salih Muslim, his brother took refuge in Turkey. So he was not a PKK figure. He was even an anti-PKK figure. He lived in Turkey for years. Some of them fled to Europe and had to settle there. Now we need to distinguish between two things here. There are some voices in Turkey, cracked voices. What will happen? The Kurds should get a special region there too. A special region there would be a special region directly controlled by the PKK. And this would have very heavy consequences for Turkey. Therefore, we have not fought this struggle for years so that the PKK could establish a special region there.